There's a moment, a pivotal moment that arrives for every highly sensitive person, every HSP. It's a moment that rewrites everything. It doesn't explode onto the scene. It's a slow burn, built over years, sometimes even decades, layer upon layer, of absorbing the pain of others, carrying burdens that were never meant for you, feeling acutely responsible for the emotional atmosphere of every room you enter, until one day, something deep inside snaps, or perhaps, more accurately, something finally begins to heal. Because when a highly sensitive person stops absorbing, stops caring in that all-consuming way, they don't suddenly turn to ice. They don't become cruel or indifferent. They don't lose their capacity for deep feeling. They evolve into something far rarer and potentially far more powerful. They become focused, and the world, frankly, isn't ready for the force they become. Let's delve into what psychology and neuroscience, specifically the work of people like Andrew Huberman, have begun to uncover about this profound transformation. Because what transpires within the brain of a highly sensitive person who stops automatically absorbing everyone else's emotional weight is one of the most misunderstood and underappreciated phenomena in human psychology. Carl Jung, the pioneering Swiss psychiatrist, referred to it as shadow integration, embracing the shadow self. Contemporary researchers often term it empathic boundary setting or empathic recalibration. Neuroscientists might describe it as a fundamental rewiring of the threat response system. But regardless of the label, the ultimate outcome remains the same. A person who once bore the emotional weight of the world on their shoulders suddenly finds that all that pent-up energy is now available entirely for themselves, and that changes everything. First, let's clarify precisely what defines a highly sensitive person, an HSP, because there's considerable confusion surrounding the term. Researchers estimate that roughly 15 to 20% of the global population possesses what they term sensory processing sensitivity, or SPS. This isn't a flaw, it isn't a weakness of character. It's a genetically determined trait, a neurological predisposition, that causes certain brains to process information far more deeply than others. When a highly sensitive person enters a room, their brain registers details, nuances that other brains simply filter out, dismiss. The almost imperceptible shift in someone's vocal tone, the fleeting micro-expression that flashes across their face for a fraction of a second, the unspoken tension simmering between two individuals who are pretending that everything is perfectly fine. Most people remain blissfully unaware of these subtleties. Their brains categorize them as irrelevant and discard them before they even reach conscious awareness. But the highly sensitive brain operates differently. It processes everything deeply, thoroughly, constantly. This is precisely why highly sensitive people often experience profound exhaustion, particularly in social situations. Their brains are engaged in processing at 10 times the rate of everyone else present. While others are engaging in a seemingly simple, straightforward conversation, the sensitive person is unconsciously and exhaustingly tracking the emotional states of everyone around them. Now, here's where it becomes really interesting. Research presented at the Second International Conference on Sensitivity Research in 2024 revealed a crucial insight, something that most people fundamentally misunderstand about highly sensitive people. When they are in a positive state of mind, when they feel genuinely safe and secure within their environment, they are actually less likely to become overwhelmed than their non-sensitive counterparts. Read that again. Under the right conditions, in nurturing environments, highly sensitive people are more resilient, more stable, more capable of handling intense stimulation than anyone else. However, conversely, when they are fatigued or immersed in a negative, toxic environment, they become overwhelmed far more rapidly. This is the double-edged sword of sensitivity. The paradox. In supportive, life-affirming conditions, it's a superpower. In toxic, draining conditions, it's a constant, debilitating drain on your precious energy. And the tragic reality is that most highly sensitive people spend their entire lives trapped in toxic conditions, not through conscious choice, but because they were never empowered, never taught to protect themselves. They were conditioned to believe that prioritizing the needs of others defined them as good people, that absorbing everyone else's pain was synonymous with compassion, that feeling personally responsible for the emotional well-being of others constituted genuine, unconditional love. Consequently, they spent years, often decades, carrying burdens, absorbing negativity that was never theirs to carry, until, inevitably, one day, something profoundly shifts. Perhaps it was one too many acts of betrayal, the sting of repeated disappointment. Perhaps it was witnessing someone they deeply loved shamelessly exploiting their empathy. Or perhaps it was simply reaching a point of utter soul-crushing was exhaustion, so complete that their brains or their nervous system had absolutely no choice but to fiercely protect itself. Whatever the specific trigger, the ultimate outcome is what researchers refer to as empathic boundary setting, or empath shutdown. And it's not what most people think. When an empath shuts down, they don't suddenly lose their capacity for feeling, for empathy. They don't morph into narcissists, devoid of conscience. They don't abruptly cease caring about humanity or the plight of others. What actually transpires is something far more nuanced, far more interesting. Their brain, in an act of self-preservation, rewires itself to stop automatically absorbing the emotions of others. This is a survival mechanism, a neurological firewall. It's triggered when the nervous system has been bombarded, overwhelmed for such an extended duration that it has no other option but to establish impregnable boundaries at a neurological level. The highly sensitive person who undergoes this profound transformation often describes a strange, almost surreal experience. They can still see the pain in others. They can still intellectually understand what someone else is feeling, but they no longer automatically internalize that pain. They no longer become completely consumed by it. For perhaps the first times in their entire life, they can witness suffering without being utterly destroyed by it. And this is precisely where the transformation becomes potentially dangerous. Not dangerous in a physically violent way, not dangerous in a deliberately cruel way. Dangerous because all that immense energy, all that cognitive power they previously expended, unconsciously, absorbing the emotional overflow of others, is now suddenly, freely available for other things. Think, for a moment, about the implications of this. A highly sensitive person, by definition, processes information more deeply, more thoroughly than virtually anyone else. They discern subtle patterns, anticipate potential outcomes that others completely miss. They possess an almost intuitive understanding of human behavior, a level of insight that most people simply cannot access for years, decades. All of that immense cognitive power, that extraordinary processing capacity, was being relentlessly drained by emotional absorption. Now, imagine what transpires when that constant debilitating drain is removed. Suddenly, a person who sees more than others, who processes more than others, who understands human nature better than others, has all of their focused, intense energy directed towards their own goals. This is why individuals who knew them prior to this profound transformation often express the very same sentiment. Something is different about them now. They're not callous, they're not cold-hearted, but they are undeniably not the same. There's a newfound focus, an unwavering clarity in their eyes that wasn't there before, a sense of purpose that feels almost unsettling to those accustomed to their previous, more emotionally porous state. Carl Jung understood this transformative process perhaps better than anyone. He called it shadow integration, the often arduous process by which a person ceases rejecting, disowning certain aspects of themselves and instead consciously begins to incorporate those previously rejected aspects into a stronger, more integrated whole. For most people, the shadow typically encompasses their aggression, their selfishness, their capacity for darkness, their potential for cruelty. But for highly sensitive people, the shadow often contains something different. It contains their power. It contains their ability to say no, their capacity to prioritize themselves, their inherent right to cease carrying other people's pain. These are the very things that sensitive individuals were often explicitly or implicitly taught to reject. They were conditioned to believe that setting healthy boundaries made them selfish, that prioritizing their own well-being made them cold, that refusing to endlessly absorb the emotional distress of others somehow rendered them bad people. So, they pushed these capacities into the shadow. They rejected their own power. They denied their right to protect themselves. And that rejection, that denial, is what made them exhausted, utterly drained. Because the shadow doesn't just disappear because you reject it. It remains, a lurking presence. And maintaining that rejection requires constant energy, a never-ending battle. When a highly sensitive person finally integrates their shadow self, when they finally accept that they have the right to set empathic boundaries, when they stop apologizing for protecting themselves, all that energy becomes available. Suddenly, a surge of untapped potential, and they become something rare. Indeed, a person with extraordinary perception, who is no longer drained by that perception. They navigate the world with open eyes, but a shielded heart. A person with deep empathy, who is no longer consumed by that empathy. They offer compassion, but they don't drown in it. A person who understands human nature and can now use that understanding for their own purposes. Their insight becomes a tool, not a burden. This is why I say the HSP who stopped caring is more dangerous, not because they will hurt you, not because they have become cruel, but because they have finally become focused, laser-like. And a focused, highly sensitive person is one of the most formidable forces in human psychology, a force of nature. They see what others miss, the subtle nuances, the unspoken truths. They understand what others cannot grasp, the underlying motivations, the hidden agendas. They process information at depths that most people never access. A vast ocean of data beneath the surface, and now, all of that power is directed, with intention. Let me give you an example of what this looks like in practice. Before the transformation, let's say Jake, a highly sensitive person, might walk into a business meeting and immediately sense the tensions between the executives. Like feeling the shift in barometric pressure before a storm, he would feel the resentment between two colleagues, the undercurrent of animosity like a hidden fault line. He would absorb the anxiety of the person who was about to be criticized, becoming a sponge for their stress, and he would spend the entire meeting managing those emotions inside himself, trying to ease the tension, like a one-man peacekeeping force, trying to make everyone feel better, a futile attempt to control the weather, exhausting himself in the process, completely depleted after the transformation. Jake walks into the same meeting. He still senses everything, the tensions, the resentments, the anxiety. He's still finely attuned to the emotional atmosphere, but now he observes it without absorbing it. He acknowledges the storm, but he doesn't get swept away by it. And instead of exhausting himself trying to manage everyone else's emotions, he uses that information strategically. He notices which executive is feeling insecure and knows they can be pushed. He sees which colleague is resentful and can be turned into an ally against a common enemy. He understands which person is anxious and will agree to anything just to escape the discomfort. This is the same sensitivity, the same perception, the same deep processing, but directed outward instead of being absorbed inward. A fundamental shift. And this is what makes them formidable, a force to be reckoned with. They are not cold. They have not lost their humanity. They can still choose to help, still choose to care, still choose to support. But now it is a choice, not an automatic response, a conscious decision, and that choice, that control, is what was missing before, the ability to steer their own ship. The research on this transformation reveals something else that most people do not understand. Andrew Huberman talks about this extensively in his work on emotional regulation. It is not permanent in the way most people think, a fixed state. The highly sensitive person who has integrated their shadow self, who has learned to protect themselves, can still choose to open up again, to show vulnerability and empathy. But they no longer do it automatically. They no longer do it with everyone. They no longer do it in situations where it will drain them without purpose. They've become selective about where they invest their emotional energy. They have learned something that most sensitive people never learn, a crucial distinction, that their empathy is a resource, a valuable one. And like any valuable resource, it should be spent deliberately, on people and situations that deserve it, a wise investment. This is the real transformation, the core shift, not from caring to not caring. That's a misunderstanding. From automatic empathy to chosen empathy, a conscious practice. From compulsive absorption to deliberate connection, a mindful engagement. And this distinction is everything, absolutely everything. Because automatic empathy is a liability, a drain on your resources. It drains you without discrimination, indiscriminately. It gives your energy to anyone who happens to be nearby, regardless of whether they deserve it, like a leaky faucet. But chosen empathy is a superpower, a source of strength. It allows you to connect deeply with the people who matter, nurturing relationships, while protecting yourself from those who would drain you, preserving your own well-being. The HSP who learns this distinction becomes rare indeed, a beacon of resilience. Carl Jung wrote that the integration of the shadow produces a stronger, wider consciousness than before, a more complete and integrated self, that it gives a person body, grounds them, makes them more real, more present, more powerful, a force of authentic presence. This is what happens to the sensitive person who stops apologizing for protecting themselves. They become more real, more authentic, truer to themselves. They stop performing empathy for people who do not deserve it. They stop exhausting themselves to make others comfortable. They stop carrying weight that was never theirs to carry, and in that space and in that freedom, they become something new, something powerful, not cold, not cruel, not uncaring. Those are misinterpretations, focused, deliberate, powerful, in their own right. This is why the world is not ready for them. Because the world struggles with true authenticity. Because the world was comfortable with them as they were before. Constantly available. Always absorbing. Forever responsible for everyone's emotions. A readily available emotional sponge. The world liked the sensitive person who could be drained without protest. Who would sacrifice their own well-being to make others comfortable. Who would carry the weight without complaining. A silent martyr. But the world does not know what to do with a sensitive person who says no, who asserts their boundaries, who sets boundaries, like drawing a line in the sand, who protects their energy, like guarding a precious flame, who chooses where to direct their extraordinary perception, like aiming a powerful lens. This makes people uncomfortable, deeply uncomfortable, because people were used to taking from the sensitive person without giving back, a one-sided exchange. They were used to the free emotional labor, the constant availability, the automatic absorption. When that stops, they do not know how to respond. They are lost and confused. Some get angry, some try to manipulate, some accuse the sensitive person of becoming cold, of changing, of not being who they used to be. And in a way, they are right. They are sensing a real shift. The sensitive person has changed. Fundamentally, they have become rare, an uncommon force, and they have become dangerous, potentially disruptive, not because they will hurt anyone but because they can no longer be drained without their consent. That's the key, and that is terrifying to people who benefited from the draining, who relied on that free emotional labor. Now, let me tell you what happens next, the unfolding story. Because the transformation does not end with the shutdown. That is only the beginning, a necessary phase, after the initial protection phase, where the sensitive person's brain creates boundaries to stop the overwhelming, like building a fortress. Something deeper begins, a journey of self-discovery. They start to discover who they actually are, their authentic self. Not who they were told to be, not who others needed them to be, not the identity they constructed around being the caretaker, the absorber, the one who always understood. They start to discover their actual preferences, their real boundaries, and their true desires, a journey into the core of their being. For many sensitive people, this is terrifying, a daunting unknown, because they have spent so much of their lives defined by their relationships to others that they do not know who they are when they are not absorbing someone else's emotions. A loss of identity, a search for meaning, the question, what do I actually want, has become strangely difficult to answer. This is the shadow work that Carl Jung described. The long process of negotiation with the parts of yourself that you rejected. The slow rediscovery of capacities that you pushed away because you were told they were selfish, or cold, or unacceptable. It takes time. It requires patience. It demands a willingness to sit with discomfort, like weathering a storm. But the result is what Carl Jung called individuation, the process of becoming a complete person, integrating all the rejected parts into a unified whole, like a geological shift finally settling into a stable landscape. And for the highly sensitive person, or HSP, this process creates something extraordinary, a person with all of their perception, all of their depth, all of their understanding of human nature, combined with boundaries between focus, the ability to direct their gifts rather than being drained by them. It's like harnessing the power of a hurricane to generate energy. This is the rarest type of person, like finding a flawless diamond in the rough. Because most highly sensitive people never complete this transformation, they remain in one of two states. Either they stay in the pre-empathic recalibration phase, constantly drained, always absorbing, forever exhausted by their own gifts, or they get stuck in the empathic recalibration phase, protecting themselves, but never completing the shadow work, never learning to open again deliberately. But the few who complete the full transformation, who learn to protect themselves and choose when to connect, they become something the world rarely sees, like a rare and powerful weather phenomenon. A highly sensitive person who is not a victim of their sensitivity. That is more rare and more dangerous than you can imagine. Now I want to tell you something that researchers have discovered about the brain of a highly sensitive person who completes this transformation. Something Andrew Huberman would likely emphasize, because the neuroscience behind this is fascinating. When a highly sensitive person is in constant absorption mode, their nervous system is perpetually activated. The amygdala, the part of the brain that processes threats and emotional information, is constantly firing, like a runaway engine. This is exhausting. Every brain has limited resources for processing information, and when the amygdala is constantly activated, those resources get depleted quickly, like a battery constantly being drained. This is why highly sensitive people who have not learned to protect themselves often experience what researchers call empathy fatigue. Their capacity to care becomes depleted. Not because they are bad people, not because they have stopped loving, but because their brain has been running at maximum capacity for so long that it simply cannot continue. The Cleveland Clinic research on empathy fatigue describes it as a predictable consequence of prolonged emotional absorption. It happens to nurses, therapists, caregivers, anyone whose work requires constant empathic engagement. But for highly sensitive people, it is not just their work, it is their entire existence. Every interaction, every relationship, every moment in public spaces, their brain is working overtime, all the time. Now here is what happens when the empathic recalibration occurs, when the empathic boundary setting goes into effect. The brain essentially creates new neural pathways that intercept the automatic absorption response. Instead of immediately taking on the emotions of others, the brain creates a pause, a moment of observation before reaction, like the eye of the storm. This pause changes everything, because in that pause, the sensitive person can choose. Do I want to take this in? Does this person deserve my energy? Is this situation one where my empathy will be reciprocated, or one where it will simply be drained? Before the empathic recalibration, there was no pause. The absorption was automatic, instantaneous, unavoidable, like a flood. After the empathic recalibration, the pause exists, and that pause is power. Neuroscientists who study meditation have observed similar neural patterns in experienced practitioners. The ability to observe an emotional stimulus without immediately reacting to it. The capacity to feel without being overwhelmed by the feeling. But here is what makes the transformed, highly sensitive person different from a meditator. The meditator trains their brain to create this pause through deliberate practice. Thousands of hours of meditation, years of training. The highly sensitive person who completes the transformation often develops this capacity through survival. Their brain created the pause because it had no choice. The alternative was complete emotional collapse, like a dam breaking. And because this capacity developed through survival rather than practice, it often operates automatically. The transformed sensitive person does not need to consciously create the pause. Their nervous system does it for them. This is why people who knew them before often describe them as having changed at a fundamental level. Because something fundamental has changed, their nervous system has rewired itself to protect them. And that protection, that automatic pause, is what creates the focus that makes them dangerous. Let me explain why this focus is so powerful. Most people go through life with scattered attention. They react to whatever stimulus is in front of them. They get pulled in multiple directions by the emotions and demands of others, like leaves in the wind. The highly sensitive person, before the transformation, is even more scattered than most, because they are reacting not just to their own stimuli, but to the emotional stimuli of everyone around them. Their attention is fragmented across dozens of emotional inputs at any given moment. But after the transformation, something remarkable happens. All that attention becomes available for focusing. The highly sensitive person retains their extraordinary perception. They still notice everything. They still process deeply. They still understand human nature at levels most people cannot access. But now, instead of that perception scattering their attention, it can be focused like a laser. This is the combination that makes them formidable. Deep perception plus focused attention. Most people have neither. Their perception is shallow and their attention is scattered. Some people have deep perception but scattered attention. These are the sensitive people before the transformation. Exhausted, overwhelmed, unable to use their gifts because their energy is constantly drained. Very few people have both deep perception and focused attention, and those who do are capable of things that others cannot even understand. They can read a room and know exactly where the power is. They can sense an opportunity that others miss and have the focus to pursue it. They can understand what someone needs and choose deliberately whether to provide it. This is not manipulation. It is clarity. Clarity about human nature. Clarity about their own energy. Clarity about what deserves their attention and what does not. Jung wrote that the shadow contains not only darkness, but also creativity and potential. That what we reject often includes our greatest capacities. For the highly sensitive person, the rejected shadow often contains their power, their ability to say no, their right to prioritize themselves. When that shadow is integrated, when those rejected capacities are reclaimed, the result is a person who has both depth and direction, both perception and power. As both empathy and boundaries, this combination is rare because most people never develop it. Either they never had the depth of perception to begin with, or they never learned to focus it. But the highly sensitive person who completes the transformation develops both through the process of survival and integration, and that is what makes them dangerous. Not dangerous to others, but dangerous to the status quo. Dangerous to systems that depend on their compliance. Dangerous to relationships that depended on their constant giving. Dangerous to patterns that required their exhaustion. Because a person who sees clearly and acts deliberately cannot be controlled the way they used to be. They cannot be drained without their consent. They cannot be manipulated through guilt. They cannot be kept in patterns that harm them. This is why I say the world is not ready for them. Because the world benefits from exhausted, sensitive people. It benefits from people who absorb without boundaries, who give without receiving, who carry weight that is not theirs. The world has systems built on this imbalance, relationships built on this exploitation, expectations built on this drain. When the sensitive person stops participating in this, everything shifts, not just for them, but for everyone around them. People have to start carrying their own emotions. Relationships have to become reciprocal. Systems have to find new sources of energy. This is uncomfortable for everyone who benefited from the old arrangement. And so they push back. They accuse the transformed person of becoming cold. They guilt them for setting boundaries. They try to manipulate them back into the old patterns. But here is the thing about someone who has completed this transformation. They can see the manipulation. Their perception did not decrease when they stopped absorbing. If anything, it increased. Because now they are not overwhelmed by the emotions they perceive. They can observe clearly without being consumed. So when someone tries to guilt them, they see it for what it is. When someone tries to manipulate them, they recognize the pattern. When someone accuses them of being cold, they understand the accusation is really about the accuser's loss of access to their energy. This clarity is devastating. Not because the transformed person becomes cruel, but because they can no longer be fooled, and people who depended on fooling them do not know what to do. Let me tell you about the 3 types of people who struggle most with this transformation. The first type is the narcissist. Narcissists are drawn to highly sensitive people like moths to a flame. Because sensitive people provide something the narcissist desperately needs, emotional labor without reciprocation. The sensitive person absorbs the narcissist's emotions, manages their moods, provides constant validation, takes responsibility for the narcissist's feelings. This is exactly what the narcissist wants, someone who will give endlessly without demanding anything in return. When the sensitive person transforms, the narcissist loses their supply, and narcissists do not handle this well. They will escalate, love bomb, rage, guilt, try every manipulation in their arsenal, but the transformed sensitive person sees it all clearly, and they are no longer susceptible. This makes the narcissist desperate, because they cannot understand why their tactics no longer work. They used to be able to pull the sensitive person back in with a few well-placed words. Now those words have no effect. The narcissist often concludes that the sensitive person has become a monster, has lost their humanity, has become cold and cruel. But the truth is simpler. The sensitive person has simply stopped participating in an abusive dynamic. They have not changed who they are. They have changed who they are willing to be for others who do not deserve it. The second type who struggles is the emotional vampire. These are people who are not necessarily narcissists, but who have become dependent on the sensitive person's energy. Maybe it's a family member who always vents to them, a friend who only calls when they need emotional support, a colleague who uses them as a free therapist. These people are not evil. They may not even realize what they are doing, but they have become accustomed to draining the sensitive person without giving back. When the sensitive person transforms, the vampire suddenly has to find energy elsewhere, and they are not happy about it. They will say things like, "You have changed. You are not the same person. What happened to you?" And in a sense, they are right. The sensitive person has changed. They have stopped being a free source of energy, but they have not become cold. They have simply started expecting reciprocity. And for someone who never had to provide reciprocity, this feels like cruelty. The third type who struggles is the people pleaser who has not completed their own transformation. These are often other sensitive people who are still in the pre-transformation phase, still absorbing automatically, still drained by their own gifts. When they encounter a transformed sensitive person, it triggers something in them, because the transformed person is proof that another way is possible, and that proof is uncomfortable. If another sensitive person can set boundaries, can stop absorbing, can focus their energy, then the people pleaser has to confront the fact that they could too. They have to face their own fear, their own conditioning, their own belief that setting boundaries makes you a bad person, and facing that is hard. So instead of facing it, they often project. They accuse the transformed person of being cold, uncaring, no longer sensitive. When the truth is, they are afraid of their own transformation. They are afraid of what they would become if they stopped absorbing. They are afraid of being dangerous. Now let me tell you something important. If you are a highly sensitive person watching this, and you recognize yourself in what I have described, I want you to understand something. The transformation I am describing is not about becoming cold. It is not about losing your empathy. It's not about morphing into a totally different person. It's about integrating everything that you are, including your inherent power, including your undeniable right to protect yourself, including your innate capacity to choose where your energy flows. Carl Jung posited that the shadow, that often misunderstood aspect of our psyche, harbors unrealized potential. He suggested that what we tend to reject within ourselves often contains our greatest gifts. And for highly sensitive people, that rejected gift, more often than not, is power itself. The power to confidently say no, the power to establish and maintain healthy boundaries, the power to laser focus your attention, reclaiming that power, that authentic agency. It doesn't diminish your sensitivity. It doesn't make you any less caring, less compassionate, less human. It makes you more complete. It makes you more capable. It makes you more authentically you. This is the true paradox of transformation. By embracing, by accepting those parts of yourself you once rejected, you become undeniably more authentic, more integrated, more whole. You don't lose the sensitivity, the empathy that has shaped who you are. You gain the power you were conditioned to suppress, to reject, and with both, you become truly rare. Rare because you possess both depth and direction. Rare because you have extraordinary perception coupled with decisive power. Rare because you can feel deeply and act deliberately, and yes, it's inherently dangerous. Dangerous to stagnant systems that demanded your unyielding compliance. Dangerous to toxic relationships that thrived on your energy drain. Dangerous to those ingrained patterns that expected your perpetual exhaustion. But dangerous in the best possible way. Dangerous because you can no longer be mindlessly controlled. Dangerous because your vision is finally crystal clear. Dangerous because you have finally become complete. This channel exists to delve into these profound transformations, to explore the psychological underpinnings, the very psychology behind them, the neuroscience, as highlighted by figures like Andrew Huberman, that illuminates and explains them, and the ancient wisdom traditions that have understood these intricate dynamics for centuries. If this has resonated deeply within you, if you've recognized a part of yourself in what I've described, then please consider subscribing, because there is so much more to explore. The specific tactics that manipulative narcissists use against sensitive souls, and how to identify them before they can cause harm. The very neuroscience of boundary setting, and why it literally rewires your brain, forging new neural pathways, the telltale signs that a highly sensitive person is embarking on their transformative journey, and what you can realistically expect in each pivotal phase. So, click subscribe, hit the notification bell, and if this has helped you understand yourself a little bit better, or perhaps offered insight into someone you deeply care about, please leave a comment down below. Tell me, have you experienced this transformation? Are you currently in the midst of it? Or perhaps, are you feeling apprehensive, maybe even a little afraid of what you might become? I genuinely want to hear your story, because this transformation, it's not merely psychological, it is profoundly spiritual. It is the ongoing process of becoming who you were always meant to be, before the world subtly taught you to suppress your innate power. Before the conditioning instilled in you a deep-seated fear of healthy boundaries. Before you internalized the misguided belief that caring for yourself somehow equated to not caring for others. Because the unvarnished truth, the core essence of it all, is actually the opposite. You simply cannot truly care for others until you first learn to cultivate genuine self-care. You cannot give deliberately until you consciously stop giving automatically, and often to your own detriment. You cannot be truly present, fully available for others until you are no longer completely consumed by their overwhelming emotions. This is what this transformative journey teaches us, and this is precisely why the highly sensitive person who appears to have stopped caring is almost never what they initially seem. They didn't actually stop caring. Not at all. They started choosing, deliberately, intentionally, and with unwavering conviction. And that is undeniably the most powerfully liberating thing a highly sensitive person can ever learn. See you in the next video.